So I'm Dr. Rebecca Doggett. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Lurie Center. I primarily am interested in young children and early childhood. So at the Lurie Center, I primarily work doing diagnostic evaluations with young kids. But I have a long professional history of intervention and behavioral supports for children and families as well. And I spent a lot of time during my graduate school education studying pivotal response treatment with doctors Robert and Lynn Cagle, who developed this approach. So this is something that I have a lot of love for and experience with, and I'm really excited to share with you today. So I'll go over a brief agenda. I'll provide a brief overview of pivotal response treatment, talks about the techniques, and really I want to focus on making this as practical as possible. So we'll cover how to use some of these PRT strategies at home and integrate them into the day-to-day. And at the end, we'll save about 15 minutes or so for a Q&A. So as questions come up throughout, you can feel free to put them in the chat, but I probably won't address them until the end. All right, so let's start talking about what is PRT. So PRT is an evidence-based naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention, or an NDBI, and there are a few kind of named interventions that fall under this naturalistic approach. And really, it's a modification of applied behavior analysis, or ABA, to include very naturalistic and play-based approaches in the intervention, as well as components that really aid in motivating the kids to engage. So the idea is kind of like they don't even really realize that it's therapy, that's enjoyable, it's play-based, and it's meant to be fun and within the natural environment. Like I mentioned before, it was developed by doctors Robert and Lynn Cagle, along with other primary researchers, and it has a strong evidence base. So the Cagles really saw some challenges in the field of treatment and intervention. While ABA has a very strong history of research support, some of the literature was indicating that when kids were not motivated to engage, we were seeing some challenges in seeing progress. And when kids aren't motivated, or they're not really responding to learning opportunities or some of the stimuli around them, it can lead to feeling very helpless or frustrated. And when any of us are feeling frustrated or feel like they're unsuccessful a lot, it can lead to less motivation for learning and trying, and then giving up. So really the goal was, how can we create a situation where we're supporting kids in their learning and developing new skills, where they're motivated to do that, so that we can see more gains and more progress. And the word pivotal in the title is referring to what the Cagles describe as pivotal areas. The main one is motivation. So meaning that when we incorporate techniques that improve motivation into the therapy, we actually see larger gains in that child's skills beyond just a specific behavior we might have been targeting. So we can see broader progress just by keeping kids motivated in treatment. And actually, I'm just going to skip to this slide for a second. The research actually tells us that when kids are motivated, we can see more generalization and skills across settings. So one of the challenges in autism is that sometimes skills are not easily applied across different settings or across different people. That's what we call generalization. But when kids are motivated, we see that generalization improve. We can also see improvements in spontaneous speech, as well as decreases in disruptive behavior and increases in positive affect. So while those may not have been treatment goals in these research studies, they actually found that because of the motivational components, these gains were being seen as well, which is really important because these are all very, very, positive aspects of an intervention program. So I want to make sure I didn't skip anything. So just kind of refresh everybody's memory about how behavior works. And these are the core principles of behaviorism, of ABA. It's really how humans function. We are all behavioral beings. And our behavior can be changed depending on the environment. So when we're thinking about behavior, we think about it in the ABCs. So an A is what we call the antecedent, or something that happens before a behavior. B is the behavior, and C is consequence, or what happens after the behavior. And you can change a behavior by changing both A, or what happens before, and C. So some examples, we see that behaviors are more likely to occur again if they have a positive consequence. So this is the idea of reinforcement. So for example, a child at Target sees a toy on the shelf and they throw a tantrum when their parents say they can't have it. The parent agrees to buy the toy so that the child will calm down and they can finish shopping. So in this case, our behavior, the tantrum, was positively reinforced by the child getting the toy. So we're probably going to see that behavior continue because it was very effective at getting them what they wanted. Another example is a child who gets allowance for doing weekly chores at home. So there's that, that positive consequence or positive reward for engaging in the behavior. And we all operate under these principles, whether we're conscious of them or not. We are all rewarded in some way. And the more that we're rewarded or have a positive consequence for a behavior, we're more likely to do that again. So all of these principles apply in PRT. But what we are thinking about in terms of our antecedent is a teaching opportunity. It's a question to the child. It's a prompt. It's an opportunity for them to respond. Then we have the behavior that we're trying to support and develop. And then what's critical is that we have a natural consequence to that behavior. So a consequence or a reward or a reinforcer that's naturally related to the behavior occurring. Okay, so we talked about why motivation is so important. And we'll talk now, and I'll go through specific slides on each of these PRT techniques. So I just listed them all here, and we'll go through each one individually on the following slides. So the techniques are child choice, varying the tasks, and I'll go into these details, reinforcing attempts, and natural reinforcement. And you can use these techniques to target a wide variety of different social communication skills, as well as behavioral, self-help, and academic goals. Today, we're really going to be focusing on social communication, particularly developing first words and early language skills. But you can absolutely apply these same strategies to many, many different behaviors that you're trying to support. So let's talk about child choice. This is a really, really important and easy way to improve and increase motivation. So you can think about the child's interest. We want to have a sense of, okay, what does this child like? And let's provide them with opportunities to choose between preferred activities. We know when they're engaged in something they like, something that's enjoyable, they're going to be more interested, they're going to be more motivated. So as best you can, we want to try and provide teaching opportunities when that child is engaging in really highly preferred activities. We want to also keep in mind that motivations can change, right? So maybe a child is really craving some water after a salty snack, or maybe they've had a lot of spaghetti one day, even though that might be their favorite food, but because they've eaten so much, that's no longer something that's enjoyable, right? Our motivations and our preferences can change, and we want to always be thoughtful about, okay, what's motivating to the child right now? And it may not be what's motivating to the child an hour ago or even yesterday. So we always want to think, is this reward, is this activity something that the child is engaged by? So we always want to follow the child's lead. We're setting the stage for a situation where they're going to be having fun, or they're going to enjoy learning. So we always kind of want to follow the child's lead rather than say, okay, now we're going to play with cars and practice that. If they're not into that right now, that's okay. Let's follow them. Are they playing with the dinosaurs? Are they playing with the toy kitchen set? If so, that's fine. Let's follow their lead, and we'll work on our goals and our behaviors within that activity that they're into at the moment. So the idea is we think about there are activities that we're doing, and then us as the coach or the parent or even the clinician are interspersing opportunities where we're going to be practicing their early communication skills. So I'll give you some examples as we go along, but one example might be, okay, we're playing with a child who really enjoys lots of physical games. That's something that they're really motivated by. They enjoy being tickled. This is a great opportunity to practice language and social engagement. So you can, first tickle the child, then wait, and then give them an opportunity. That's the space, that's the opportunity for them to practice a social communication skill. Maybe it's a vocalization, saying tickle or more, or maybe it's a gesture, like a sign like this. It can be wherever the child is and whatever the child is learning at that point, but that's the opportunity for them to practice their social communication. So we've found a preferred activity that they're really into, and we've tried to intersperse an opportunity for them to practice a skill that they're learning. So we want to think about both toy play, activities, and social routines. You can also give kids opportunities to choose between different activities or items or toys. And this is a really good way to build motivation, because rather than us saying, okay, we're going to do this now, we're giving the child a lot of autonomy. And when a child feels like they have control of the situation, where things are going their way, we're going to see that motivation be more present. So for example, if we're trying to, think about ways to practice early language, you can give a child a choice between different activities. Okay, do you want to play with cars, or do you want to play with bubbles? And even that is an opportunity for them to practice their requesting, right? They might point to the thing they want. You might encourage them to maybe point to a picture of the activity if that's kind of their mode of communication. They might be able to vocalize. So even just the act of choosing, okay, what are we going to play, is a way that we can start to foster the social communication. Requesting is really a foundational skill, and we want to see kids develop that skill verbally or through picture communication or through pointing and gesture. So these are all really good ways to support using and developing those skills. Something to remember is that child choice doesn't mean that the child is controlling the whole situation. You are providing the choices and making the options that the child is then able to choose from. So if it's raining outside and outside's not an option, then that's not one of the choices, but you can still provide them choices of activities that are available to them and that are feasible. So some parents always wonder, well, I can't always do what my child wants to do and follow their lead. Well, that might be the case. Yeah, there are some times it's not going to be feasible, but you can always give a choice between what is an option or what is available or what they can do. And even that act is going to help them feel more control. Even if it's something that you think is relatively minor, like, do you want to sit in that chair or this chair? Do you want to have the blue marker or the red marker? You can make choices out of almost every situation you're in. And just remember, you can control the choices and the child is choosing between those things. Another really good thing to remember as you're trying to think about how can I create opportunities for my child to practice their first words, their early gesturing, think about shared control. And this means think about the environment and their access to materials. So for example, if we're trying to help a child request more snack, let's say, rather than giving them all of the snack bag, so maybe they're eating goldfish, rather than giving them access to all of the snacks at once, we want to maintain what's called shared control, or control of some of the items or the materials. So we hold the bag, give them a few at a time. That way, after they eat the next few goldfish, they can get that practice again for requesting more, saying more, pointing to what they want. And then we can give them some more goldfish. So instead of providing one opportunity where they practice and then you've given them the whole bag of goldfish, they're actually getting multiple opportunities to use those skills, even in just one snack setting, because you're controlling and you have some shared control of the materials. You can also what we call block access to force the child to engage with you and provide a request. So maybe you give them a screw top container, something that they can't open that has the snacks in it, so that we're helping them practice asking for help. That might be something that's verbal, so it might be help. It might even just be a gesture of giving that item to you. That is a really nice way of indicating, hey, I need help. It's an initiation socially. And you've done that because of the environment, of the way that you've set up the environment has encouraged them to use their social communication skills. So always think about, how can I keep some control of the materials, whether that's toys or snacks or something related to the activity, or can I figure out a way that it's going to encourage them to engage with me in an interaction, because they might need my help for something or they need to ask for something. So we're really encouraging this overall turn taking through management of different stimuli and environmental aspects. You can also use a child's restricted or repetitive behaviors as opportunities for learning language. And this sometimes is an idea that hasn't struck a lot of people, because sometimes we see those repetitive behaviors as interfering or as challenging to get them to move on from. So for example, a child might be very interested in turning on and off the light switch. That's a really preferred activity. They really enjoy it. Okay, let's go with that. Let's go with that, preferred activity, but use it to try and create some ways for them to learn some social communication skills within it. So for example, you can use that to teach on and off as language. So you can sort of, again, this is shared control, right? If you kind of block the light switch initially, you can provide that opportunity for the child to make a vocalization on, and then you can turn the light on, same thing, block the light switch. They need to request verbally off, and then you can allow the child to turn it back off. So you're using their preferred activity, even if it's a repetitive behavior, for an opportunity to learn social communication skill. All right, so we're gonna move beyond child choice to our next PRT technique, which is a little bit of a jargony one, but it's called interspersing maintenance and acquisition tasks. And this is actually just complicated words for a pretty simple idea. Basically, a maintenance task is a task or a skill that the child has already mastered. They do really well and easily. An acquisition task is something that the child is learning, that they're not yet doing consistently or completely. So for example, in terms of vocabulary, a child may really readily say the word ball. That's something that's well within their vocabulary. So we call that's a maintenance word or a maintenance skill, but they're not yet learning car. That's something that they haven't yet learned. They don't know that's not within their vocabulary yet. So that's an acquisition task or an acquisition skill. So it's really thinking about what's mastered versus what are they learning. And if you think about it in your own life, if someone were, if you were trying to learn something that was very new and challenging, and that was the only thing you had to learn, like I had to sit down and learn, calculus for 2 hours, we would all feel very unmotivated. It would be challenging. We wouldn't feel very successful. But the idea is if you primarily give the child opportunities to practice those things that they're readily doing, that they have acquired already, and then intersperse opportunities for them to practice those new skills that they haven't yet mastered, we're going to keep their motivation up. They're not going to feel like I'm just continuously needing to practice this thing that's really hard for me. So we always want to mix acquisition tasks with maintenance tasks. And really, there's no exact ratio. This is just kind of a philosophy. But think about many more opportunities for those maintenance skills than acquisition, and you're kind of peppering in those opportunities for the new skill. And that's really how we're going to keep the child engaged and keep the child motivated. We also want to vary the way that we present different opportunities for social communication skills. So if we're working on supporting a child in saying more in their, developing their vocal repertoire, we want to do this in different ways. So not just in the context of foods or snacks. That's a really common way to increase that particular request. But we want to use it in different ways with toys. So maybe there's like an action that you do with a toy that they really like putting a car down a ramp, and they can use, their communication skills more in that context. Or they can use it with bubbles, or they can use it with going down the slide at the park. So we always want to think about how do we vary the activities. First of all, it helps with generalization, but second of all, it just helps with their motivation, right? If we're always asking them more in the context of snack, and that's kind of over and over again, it can get boring, and they may not be able to take that skill into different situations and settings. We also want to vary what we're working on within an activity. So maybe we're playing with cars, and there are a few different goals that we could target there in terms of early language skills. We could work on the child learning the word car. We could work on the child learning the word go. We could work on colors. We could work on numbers, like how many cars go down the ramp. So there are lots of different things that you could build and support within any one activity, but you're changing that target skill within that one activity. And again, we always want to use different items and situations to help a child generalize their skills. So if they're really good at labeling car with that one favorite toy car, we want to help them practice that in other situations. So we take that and apply it to the actual car, right? And maybe they're really motivated to get in the car and go for a ride, or get in the car and go to the park. And they can say car before you get in the actual car as a way to request going into the car. So we want to always think about, okay, how can we take this skill or this word or this mode of communication and generalize it with different items and different situations. One really key thing, especially in early language learning, is to reward and reinforce and praise attempts. So learning language is really challenging, and it can be very frustrating for kids. And we really want to keep them motivated by rewarding even just a close attempt at a word or a way of communicating. So really any clear goal-directed attempt to respond, especially in this phase of learning first words and early communication, we want to connect that with a reward. So even if they're just saying the first syllable, they're just saying ba instead of the whole word of ball, or even if it doesn't sound remotely close to ball, but the child is really just learning to provide any kind of vocalization to request, then we should reward that. That's a good attempt. It was a relevant attempt to what we were trying to encourage. And we want to then reward them for that. And I'll talk on the next slide or two about specific things around rewarding. Another example might be a child who's not yet pointing with their finger, which is a really critical skill for nonverbal communication. And maybe they're just kind of vaguely, doing a point that's not quite a clear point, or there's something that's not quite formed about their pointing, or maybe it's almost kind of like a reach, but they're trying to point with their finger. That's all great. That's an approximation. It's an attempt. We want to still reward that attempt, even if it's not perfect. Because if we never got rewarded for our attempts, and we were only getting those rewards for perfection in a skill that's hard and frustrating to develop, we would all feel very unmotivated and not want to try. And that can happen with kids. They're very frustrated easily, especially with language learning. And we can see a lot of kids kind of go to crying or whining or something that's easy for them to do and has been effective. So especially as we're teaching new skills that are more based in social communication, the more we can reward, reinforce, encourage those, the better. We want to think about reasonable attempts though, right? So if we're encouraging a child to use verbal communication or a word, so let's say they want to play with the ball and we're working on them saying ball, even if they can't say the full word, I wouldn't want to reward some type of disruptive behavior or some other more socially inappropriate attempt at communication. We really want to make sure that the attempt is reasonable. So a sound, a first syllable, but not a behavior that we don't want to see continue. As the child starts to master the skill, we might change the criteria for them to get rewarded. So instead of saying, that they will be rewarded with the ball when they say ba, we might say, okay, that's something that they've now mastered. They've mastered that first syllable. And now we're going to really push them to give us the full word. So we want to hear that attempt at the full word rather than the first syllable. So as the child masters certain aspects of language and communication, you can then kind of ramp up your expectations about what the attempt really looks like. So the real key part around PRT and what I've kind of talked about in my examples going forward is what's called natural and contingent reinforcement, where we want to see that there's a direct relationship between a child's behavior and what they're rewarded with. And historically, this has been somewhere where kids have not seen that connection. So for example, they may have been taught to say words like, say car or say ball, and as a reward been given something completely unrelated, like a snack. And that doesn't help kids learn the language behind it. They're like, okay, I say ball, but I get a snack. That's confusing, right? We want there to be a natural relationship. So in the examples that I've given, you've seen that we have that natural response. A child says ball and they're given a ball. They say car, the car goes down the ramp. They say tickle, they get tickled. They say more, they get more of that activity. So we always want to see that natural consequence wherever possible, instead of rewarding with an unrelated reward. Because we're not going to see that generalization of skills, that motivation, and the connection of, oh, I communicate in this way, and it means this. That's a very clear connection. Remember that rewards and reinforcers don't have to be objects. They don't have to be tangibles. They can be physical, like tickle, being chased, being swung, being lifted up. They can be requests like open, more, on, off. So they don't always just have to be an object word or a food word. They can be a lot of different types of rewards. And again, we're always thinking about what does a child really like? What's motivating to them? Do they like being swung up and down? Do they like being chased? Do they like being tickled? If so, yeah, these are all great reinforcers that we can use to teach language and social communication skills. Ideally, we want to create these opportunities for them during the day-to-day. We want to use everyday routines and activities to help them build skills. So especially if you're a parent, we cannot be a child's therapist, and we're not meant to be, but we can think about what are some easy ways to support my child's language development within the day-to-day routine that are easy for me to do, that are not intended to be a treatment session, but are just like ways to practice. So we've talked about a few of them within play, within mealtime routines, within outdoor activities. You can even think about, you know, some skills like, okay, if a child is, you know, learning their adaptive or self-help skills, thinking about learning tying their shoes means that they can go outside. That's a natural consequence. So again, especially for parents, we're thinking about what are occurrences in the natural day-to-day routine of the family where, or the child's day or their play, where we can provide extra learning opportunities for them to practice their language and these nonverbal communication skills. Whenever we're thinking about reinforcement, and this is really a key component of behavioral principles as well as ABA, we want to make sure that the reinforcer is contingent on the behavior, meaning that it is highly related to the behavior we want to see. It happens immediately that they get rewarded, and that it's appropriate to the response and dependent on the response. Meaning, if a reward happens way later, like, oh, that you said more at dinner, so I'm going to give you a dessert. There's no way that a child can make that connection. There's too much delay in time for them to know, okay, I said this, that meant this consequence. The reward and the reinforcer need to be tied together in time. So if a child is saying car and they made that verbal attempt, they should get that toy car, or they should, you know, be able to put that car down the ramp. They need to have that reward immediate in order to make the connection of this, I say car, it means this, it's this car. And again, we should reward based on the response they make. So if we don't see an attempt that, you know, we want to encourage or see more of, then we should hold out and wait until we can get a little bit more of an attempt that seems reasonable. Let me talk a little bit about some different kinds of social communication initiations that you can practice with kids who are learning early language, and some ideas for how you might do that. So on the left side of this column are some common ways that kids can initiate social communication. So for example, the question, what's that? It's a very early question that kids develop, you know, in toddlerhood typically. And what's amazing about it is that it helps them build a lot of vocabulary because they're asking about things in their environment, they're learning words around them. So it's a really important skill because it's really improving their overall verbal knowledge. So one way you might do this using some PRT strategies is putting some of their like favorite toys or things that you can put into like a plastic shopping bag that they can't really see through. And then you can prompt that question of what's that when you pull it out, right? So especially if they don't know the name yet, you can say, what's that, and prompt them. And then you can pull out something really cool, something novel or something they really like, and give it to them as a reward. So you're teaching them to ask the question. They get something really cool that they like in reward for asking that initiation. You can similarly ask the question, where is it? So we're teaching kids to ask, where is it? And through that, they learn different prepositions. So if a child asks, where is it? And we say, oh, it's under the table. They're starting to hear that language. They're starting to learn what under means. They're starting to learn what on the table means. They're starting to learn what behind the chair means. So when we answer these questions, we're supporting so much language development. So if we can teach a child to ask, where is it? They're going to learn all of these different words and skills receptively. So in the PRT world, we might practice this by hiding some favorite toys. So maybe we take their favorite car, their favorite stuffed animal, and we put them in a couple places around the room. And we can prompt the child to say, like, where's doggy, or where's your car? Hopefully they model that and provide a response, even if it's not a perfect question, it's an attempt. And then we can answer it for them. Say, oh, it's under the table. And through this, you can guide them if they're not sure what that means yet. You can guide them and say, oh, look, it's under the table. It can bring them over and they can find their favorite toy. So you're teaching so many things within this one activity. You're teaching them to ask a question. You're teaching them to understand different vocabulary words around position and spatial awareness. And it's fun and it's a motivating game. Similarly, you can help them attract social attention by saying the word look, right? We always want to encourage kids to engage with us, not just for requesting or for things they need or for help, but just to show us things, right? To share something with us. So we can teach kids to say, look, and prompt them to say this before, giving or allowing them access to something. Or we can help model, like holding up a toy and saying, look, and then rewarding them with something really cool. So we want to think about what are some different ways we can support all these different social initiations using motivating toys and activities. And there's some other examples that, in the interest of time, I won't go through here, but you can kind of see how we might teach the initiation and the goal that it provides in terms of building their communication, their vocabulary. Again, you want to kind of work with your child where they're at, right? So if the child is still learning one word or single words, we may not be targeting questions yet, but that's okay. But these are all just examples of these early skills, moving from one word at a time and single words to, initial questions, and then eventually on to phrases and sentences. So we've talked about some ways that PRT can be incorporated into everyday activities, but just wanted to think about a few other strategies. Let me just highlight a couple here on this list. So carrier phrases are things that are phrases that have that we all know as like one thing, like ready, set, go, or 1, 2, 3. And they're really great because you can say ready, set, and you're then leaving a pause for the child to respond where we would expect them to say go. So these are called carrier phrases because they kind of indicate a response or a next kind of word in that set. So these kind of ready, set, goes or 1, 2, 3s are great ways for expecting a response. I like to do it with bubbles a lot in the office. So I'll say, ready, set, and I'll hold the bubbles up and I won't blow them until I get some type of communication. And that can depend on the child. It might be verbal. It might be a brief look to me to say, yeah, hey, I heard you, and that's what I want. And then I blow my bubbles, and that's the natural reward there. So these ready, set, goes, 1, 2, 3s can be really, really helpful. You might think about things as in sight but out of reach as ways to create opportunities for social requests. So, you know, if there's a snack that they like that's up on the shelf they can't reach, that's a good opportunity for them to have to engage with you either verbally or through pointing to indicate what they're wanting. Surprises and broken routines. So maybe there's a way that the child plays with a certain toy and you don't follow that routine. You kind of do something silly or you do something a little bit differently and kind of wait for a response in that situation. And we always want to give kids time. These skills take time. So waiting is just a really important piece of it. Wait longer than you think you need to or should for the child to give you a response. So when I'm going back to the bubbles activity, when I'm blowing those bubbles, sometimes I might wait for maybe 15, 20, 30 seconds for a child to produce a response. And it takes that time as they're learning these new skills. So give them the time, give them the opportunity to form a response of some kind, and then that reward. These are skills that aren't necessarily going to be coming immediately to them. So we want to make sure we have patience. And the more that we anticipate needs and you know, kind of don't give those opportunities to the child because we're already knowing what they want and we get it for them, those are times when we could have made you know, a really nice example of how a child could use their skills. So think about giving a lot of time, trying not to anticipate what a child needs, and really allowing them these opportunities to show and develop and build their skills. So some families ask me, like, well, what do we do if they don't provide a response or it's not the right word? So maybe we're practicing like saying ball, but they're saying a different word, or they're saying something that's unrelated. Like, how do I manage that? What do I reward? So in those cases, we always want to remember, we don't want there to be a wrong response because that's gonna decrease motivation. But we can always model, we can continue to model and reinforce even just a close approximation as much as possible. So we always want to stay away from saying like, no, that's wrong, or you know, discouraging the child, but try and kind of shape through modeling, through support as much as you can. We also don't want to reward any disruptive behavior. So if that's happening, which frequently happens as kids are learning language, because again, it's very frustrating. So when they can't get a word out or they can't communicate what they want, we often see crying or tantrum behavior because it's frustrating, and that's kind of how they've you know, may have learned to communicate their needs. So we don't want to reward that, but we can you know, we can wait. We can try and support some type of attempt at a nice, calm initiation. So we can wait until they're feeling a little bit more calm, prompt again, keep trying. But again, you might see this disruptive behavior, and as much as possible, we want to try not to reward that. And if you need to take a break from kind of the practice that you're doing, that's fine. You can break and come back to it later when the child is feeling a little bit more calm. But know that you're going to see that frustration. It is hard, and it's hard for these kids to learn those initial words. And once you get over that bump, the words tend to come more easily. What about the child who doesn't provide any response to an opportunity for communication? And again, we want to try and highlight the reward and have it be something really motivating. Make sure they're paying attention and they've seen it. Provide more prompting. Maybe you need to level up your prompting. And if they're still not responding at all, we don't want to reward that, but we can move on to a different opportunity. So let's say we're practicing that ball example. We have a ball, we're prompting them, ball, and we're not getting any response. That's okay. Rather than giving them the ball and rewarding the non-response, we can move to something else. Maybe you want to move to one of those maintenance tasks where you know it's reliable, that they're able to produce that word, or that's a skill that they have readily been demonstrating. Kind of get back some momentum and then try again with a different setting or a different opportunity. So here's just a list of some naturally motivating activities that happen within the day, or happen within play that you can think about as opportunities for learning. So social games like peekaboo, pat a cake, toys, favorite toys, structured games, or even like just semi-structured activities like parent is blowing bubbles, outdoor activities like going down the slide, going on the swing. Remember, think about, you always want to be thinking about, how do I control the environment so that we can encourage requesting? So if they're on the swing, you can push them a few times, then maybe you wait and you hold the swing until they ask you for swing or ask for more, and then you can continue. So again, we always want to be thinking about how can we build in more opportunities within any activity. Meals are always great. And then certainly academic and daily living activities as well, which we didn't touch on today, but we can use many of those as ways to support learning. So I wanted to make sure we have time for questions. So I'll leave this here, but this is the PRT Pocket Guide, which is for parents, and it's written by the Kegels who developed PRT. It's a very easy read and very helpful in terms of providing some specific examples and highlights, ways to incorporate some of these strategies into the day-to-day. So I'll pause there and leave the rest of the time for questions. And just as a note, we are planning to offer an extended PRT group for parents in the fall, where we go into a little bit more detail and more individualized information on how you can use some of these PRT techniques and strategies for your particular family and child. So stay tuned for communications around that.